The boots came at dawn. Over 200 Navy SEALs stood in formation on her front lawn, their shadows stretching across the quiet suburban street like a declaration of war. At the center stood the disabled veteran she'd shared breakfast with 24 hours earlier, crutch wedged under his arm, missing his left leg below the knee, eyes locked on her front door with the intensity of someone who'd come to settle a debt. ICU nurse Emma Sharp pulled back her bedroom curtain, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd only offered him a seat at a diner table, one act of basic human decency in a world that had turned its back on him. How had it escalated to this? And why were two military police vehicles idling at the corner, their engines rumbling like a promise of consequences yet to come? Bob. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to ask you something. Stay with me until the very end of this story. If it moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 27 hours earlier, Emma Sharp had been elbow deep in someone else's catastrophe. The trauma bay at Riverside General Hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she worked to stabilize a 52-year-old man who'd wrapped his pickup truck around a telephone pole. His chest was a roadmap of bruises, his breathing shallow and wet. Pneumothorax. She'd called it before the attending even looked at the x-ray. "Chest tube now," she'd ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The resident beside her fumbled with the sterile packaging, hands shaking. "Move." Emma didn't wait for permission. She prepped the site herself, made the incision, and guided the tube between his ribs with the steady confidence of someone who knew exactly how many seconds they had before the man's lung collapsed completely. 16 seconds. She'd done it in 12. By the time the attending arrived, the patient's oxygen saturation was climbing back towards safe territory. Dr. Marcus Waverly, silver-haired, perpetually annoyed, and convinced that nurses existed solely to follow his orders, glanced at the monitor and grunted. "Next time, wait for me before you make executive decisions, Sharp." Emma peeled off her gloves, her scrub splattered with blood that wasn't hers. "Next time, show up before your patient dies." The resident's eyes went wide. Waverly's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He never did. Emma had been at Riverside General for 6 years, longer than most of the residents and half the attendings. She knew which protocols could bend and which ones would break you. More importantly, she knew how to save lives when the people with fancy degrees were still trying to remember which textbook chapter applied. Her shift had started at 4 in the afternoon the previous day. It was now 8 in the morning. 16 hours of back-to-back emergencies, understaffed chaos, and administrative incompetence masquerading as hospital policy. Her lower back ached, her feet screamed inside her sneakers, and she'd consumed enough coffee to fuel a small aircraft. She clocked out, grabbed her jacket from her locker, and walked out into the cool morning air of Millbrook City, a mid-sized town in northern Colorado that prided itself on being authentically Western, while gentrifying faster than anyone wanted to admit. The Anchor Diner sat 3 blocks from the hospital, a relic from the 1960s with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that flickered like it was sending Morse code. Emma had been going there since her first week at Riverside General. The coffee was terrible, but it was consistently terrible, which counted for something. She pushed through the door at 8:17 a.m., the little bell above the frame announcing her arrival. The place was half full. Early risers, truckers, hospital staff from the night shift looking as hollowed out as she felt. She slid into her usual booth by the window, the one with the duct-taped cushion and a view of the parking lot. "Usual?" asked Marianne, the waitress who'd worked there longer than Emma had been alive. "Double usual," Emma said. "And keep the coffee coming." Marianne smirked. "Rough night?" "Aren't they all?" She'd just pulled out her phone to mindlessly scroll through nothing when the door opened again. The man who walked in moved carefully, deliberately, his weight supported by a crutch tucked under his right arm. His left pant leg hung empty below the knee, pinned neatly against his thigh. He wore a faded navy t-shirt, cargo pants, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Chief Petty Officer Derek Stone. Emma didn't know his name yet. She only saw what everyone else saw, a disabled veteran trying to find a place to sit. He approached the first booth. 2 men in business suits, laptops open, barely looked up. "Excuse me," Derek said quietly. "Is this seat taken?" "We're expecting someone," one of them replied without making eye contact. Derek nodded, moved on. The next table had a woman and her teenage daughter. He didn't even get the question out before the woman shook her head. "We're about to leave." They weren't. Their food had just arrived. Derek's jaw tightened, but he kept moving. Booth after booth, table after table. The same answer delivered in different variations of discomfort and dismissal. "No room." "Waiting for a friend." "Maybe try the counter." The counter was full. Emma watched it happen with a sinking sensation in her chest that felt too familiar, too much like the memory of her father coming home from Fallujah, with a limp and a look in his eyes that said he'd left the best parts of himself in the sand. Staff Sergeant Daniel Sharp had been a Marine, a man who'd carried wounded men on his back and earned a Purple Heart for his trouble. He'd also been a man the VA failed, a man whose PTSD went untreated until it became unmanageable, a man who died alone in a motel room 6 years after coming home because the country he'd served didn't have the decency to offer him a chair when he needed one. Derek approached her booth last. He stood there for a moment, crutch planted firmly, shoulders squared despite the exhaustion written across his face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and careful, like he was bracing for another rejection. "Would it be all right if I sat here?" Emma didn't hesitate. "Please, I'd actually appreciate the company." Relief flickered across his face, subtle but real. He lowered himself into the seat across from her, propping his crutch against the wall. Up close, she could see the faint scars on his forearms, the kind that came from shrapnel or debris. The too familiar weariness of someone who'd learned to carry weight no one else could see. "Thank you," he said. "Don't mention it." Marianne appeared with coffee for Emma and a menu for Derek. He ordered scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee. Simple, efficient. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that wasn't awkward so much as mutually understood. Emma stirred sugar into her coffee. Derek watched the parking lot through the window. "Long shift?" he asked eventually. 16 hours, Emma said. "Trauma unit." He nodded like he understood more than she'd said. "I see you?" "Sometimes. Depends on the day." She took a sip of her coffee. "You?" "Just passing through," Derek said. "Had some VA appointments in Denver. Figured I'd stop for breakfast before heading back." "Back where?" "Virginia, little place outside Norfolk." A SEAL then, or former SEAL. Emma's father had taught her to recognize the quiet intensity, the controlled posture, the way operators moved through the world like they were still on mission even when they weren't. Derek's food arrived. He ate methodically, no wasted motion. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't all shift, the weight of the last 16 hours starting to lift. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said, setting down his fork. "Sure." "Why'd you let me sit here?" Emma met his eyes. "Why wouldn't I?" Everyone else seemed to have a reason. She thought about her father, about the way people had looked at him when he came back like he was broken glass they didn't want to touch, about the quiet erosion of dignity that happened when the world decided you were inconvenient. "My dad was a Marine," she said simply. "I know what it looks like when people forget." Derek went very still. Then he nodded, just once, the kind of nod that carried the weight of shared understanding. They talked for another 20 minutes. About combat, not the Hollywood version, but the aftermath, the adjusting. The strange loneliness of coming home to a country that thanked you for your service and then looked away. About her father, who taught her to shoot and tie knots and recognize the difference between someone who was hurting and someone who was dangerous. About the small kindnesses that mattered more than grand gestures. When Derek reached for the check, Emma was faster. She handed Marianne her card before he could argue. "You don't have to—" "I know," Emma said. "I want to." His throat worked. "Thank you." "Thank you for your service," she said, and meant it in a way that went deeper than the usual platitude. They walked out together, Emma heading toward her car, Derek toward a pickup truck with Virginia plates. She was unlocking her door when the diner's front door banged open. Ralph Desmond, the owner, a thick-necked man in his 50s with a permanent scowl and a receding hairline, stood on the threshold, glaring after them. "You know," he called out, loud enough to carry across the parking lot. You really shouldn't encourage that kind of scene in my establishment. Emma turned slowly. Excuse me? People come here for a quiet breakfast, not to deal with complications. Ralph's eyes flicked toward Derek with barely concealed disdain. Bad for business. Derek's hand tightened on his crutch, but he said nothing. Emma felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. That complication is a decorated Navy SEAL, she said, her voice dangerously calm. He served this country. He saved lives. And you couldn't spare him a seat? Ralph's face reddened. I run a business, not a charity. Then you're running it wrong. She got in her car and drove away before she said something she'd regret, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Derek's truck pulled out behind her, heading in the opposite direction. She thought that was the end of it. 10 minutes later, while she was stopped at a red light, her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor, Margaret Chen. Need you to come in for a meeting, 2 p.m. today. Non-negotiable. Emma stared at the message. She'd just worked a 16-hour shift. She was supposed to have the next 2 days off. What's this about? The reply came fast. Complaint filed. We'll discuss in person. The light turned green. Emma drove home on autopilot, her mind racing. A complaint. About what? She'd saved a man's life in the trauma bay. She'd followed protocol. The diner. Ralph Desmond. She parked in her driveway, sat in the car for 5 full minutes, and then forced herself to go inside. Her apartment was small, tidy, decorated with photographs of her father in uniform and national parks posters she'd collected over the years. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and tried to sleep. She couldn't. At 1:45 p.m., she walked back into Riverside General Hospital, this time through the administrative entrance. Margaret Chen was waiting in her office, a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the permanent expression of someone managing a crisis. Sit, Margaret said. Emma sat. Margaret slid a folder across the desk. We received a complaint this morning from Ralph Desmond, owner of the Anchor Diner. He alleges that you engaged in politically inflammatory behavior while wearing hospital-affiliated attire, specifically by making a scene regarding military service and implying discrimination. Emma's jaw dropped. I was off the clock. I wasn't even wearing scrubs. I had my jacket on. You were seen leaving the hospital in scrubs earlier this morning. The connection was made. Connection to what? I bought breakfast for a veteran, that's it. Margaret sighed. It's more complicated than that. Ralph Desmond's brother, Vincent Desmond, sits on the hospital's board of directors. He's pushing for disciplinary action, suspension, pending a formal review. The words hit like a physical blow. You're kidding. I'm not. This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. You made a board member's family look bad in public, Margaret said quietly. Right or wrong doesn't always matter when politics are involved. Emma stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. So I'm being punished for basic human decency. You're being placed on temporary suspension while we investigate the complaint. It's standard procedure. It's bullshit. Margaret didn't disagree. I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. But my hands are tied. Emma walked out of the office, her vision tunneling, her pulse roaring in her ears. She made it halfway to the parking lot before her pager went off. Mass casualty incident. Multiple vehicles, all hands on deck. She stopped, stared at the pager. She was suspended. She wasn't supposed to be here. But people were dying. Emma turned around and ran back inside. The emergency department was already chaos. Gurneys lined the hallways, paramedics shouting updates, residents scrambling to triage. Dr. Waverly was barking orders, his face flushed. Sharp! He spotted her instantly. I don't care what your status is. Scrub in. Now! She didn't argue. She grabbed a trauma gown, snapped on gloves, and moved into the fray. The first patient was a teenager, unconscious, skull fracture, pupils unequal. The second was a woman in her 30s, internal bleeding, pressure dropping fast. And then they brought in Derek Stone. Emma's stomach dropped. He was on a gurney, his face covered in soot and blood, his breathing labored. The paramedic rattling off his condition barely paused for breath. White male, early 30s, pulled 3 civilians from a burning vehicle before the gas tank blew. Smoke inhalation, second-degree burns on his arms and back, possible broken ribs. He refused transport until everyone else was clear. Of course he did. Emma took the head of the gurney, her hand steady even as her mind screamed, "Derek? Derek, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. Recognition flickered. "The nurse." "Yeah, the nurse. You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay with me." "Civilians first." "They're fine. You got them out. Now let me get you stable." She worked fast. Airway assessment, oxygen mask, IV line, pain management. His vitals stabilized, but the burns needed treatment, and his lungs needed monitoring. She moved him toward a treatment room just as the main doors burst open again. But this time, it wasn't paramedics. It was a SEAL team. 6 operators in full tactical gear, moving with the precision of men who'd done this 1,000 times, scanning the room like they were clearing a hostile building. The lead operator, tall, broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped beard and eyes like flint, approached the nurse's station. "Where's Chief Petty Officer Derek Stone?" he demanded. A nurse pointed toward Emma's treatment room. The operator's gaze swung to Emma, then to Derek on the gurney. He stepped inside, his team fanning out behind him. "Chief," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You good?" Derek managed a weak grin. "Been better, Commander." The commander turned to Emma. "You treating him?" "Yes." "Then you just became the most important person in this building." Emma blinked. What?" The commander pulled out his phone, made a call, and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. "Stone is stable. Civilian nurse has him. We need the hospital director. Now." He hung up and looked at Emma. "Name?" "Emma Sharp." "Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes," he said. "Stone pulled 3 civilians from a burning wreck. He's a goddamn hero. And if anyone in this hospital tries to tell me otherwise, we're going to have a serious problem." Emma's pulse thundered. "I don't think—" "Who suspended you?" Hayes asked. She froze. "How did you—" "Stone told us. Called it in before the accident." Hayes's expression hardened. "Said some asshole at a diner tried to humiliate him. Said a nurse stood up for him. Said the hospital was retaliating." Emma's breath caught. Hayes stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You saved his life. Both times. Once with kindness. Once with skill. That doesn't go unanswered." Footsteps echoed down the hallway. The hospital director, Dr. Gregory Wells, a man in his 60s with perfectly styled gray hair and a suit that cost more than Emma's monthly rent, appeared, flanked by Vincent Desmond. "Commander Hayes," Wells said smoothly. "I understand there's been some concern." "Save it," Hayes said. "I want to know why one of your nurses is being punished for showing basic human decency to a decorated veteran." Wells's smile faltered. Vincent Desmond stepped forward. "This is a personnel matter that doesn't concern—" "It absolutely concerns me," Hayes interrupted. "Chief Stone is a member of my unit. Any retaliation against someone who treated him with respect is a federal issue, especially when your hospital receives veteran care grants. Want me to make a call to the Oversight Committee?" Vincent went pale. Hayes pulled out his phone again. "Or we can do this the easy way. Reinstate Nurse Sharp, apologize, and we walk away." The hallway went silent. Wells cleared his throat. "I'm sure we can resolve this amicably." "You've got 24 hours, Hayes said. "Clock's ticking." He turned to Emma, his expression softening just slightly. "You good here?" She nodded, still reeling. "Good. Stone's team is outside. They'll make sure nothing unexpected happens." He walked out, his team following in perfect formation. The director and Vincent Desmond exchanged a look that could have curdled milk. Emma turned back to Derek, who was watching her with something like awe. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yeah," Derek said. "I did." Outside in the parking lot, the rest of Derek's SEAL team stood in formation, 30 operators, armed, alert, and waiting. And behind them, rolling up in unmarked vehicles, were reporters. Someone had made a call. And now the whole city was about to find out exactly what had happened at the Anchor Diner. The first camera crew arrived within 12 minutes. Emma watched through the treatment room window as a local news van pulled into the emergency bay, its satellite dish extending like an antenna, searching for signal. The reporter, a young woman in a blazer despite the heat, was already talking into her microphone, gesturing toward the line of SEALs standing at parade rest near the ambulance entrance. "This can't be happening," Emma muttered. Derek shifted on the gurney, wincing as the movement pulled at his burns. "Too late to put the genie back in the bottle." "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." His voice was steady, despite the pain medication starting to fog his edges. "But here we are." Dr. Waverly appeared in the doorway, his expression caught somewhere between alarm and fascination. "Sharp, we need to move him to a monitored bed. His oxygen saturation is holding, but those burns need proper dressing and observation." Emma nodded, already releasing the gurney's brake. They moved Derek through the corridor, past gawking residents and nurses who'd heard the commotion but hadn't yet pieced together the full story. The unit clerk's phone rang non-stop. Media requests, administrative calls, messages from people who'd somehow already heard fragments of what was unfolding. They settled Derek into a private room on the medical floor, away from the chaos of the ER. Emma started a saline drip, checked his vitals again, and began the careful process of cleaning and dressing his burns. The skin across his forearms was angry and red, blistered in places where the heat had been most intense. "You ran into a burning car," she said quietly. 3 people were trapped. You could have died." "So could they." Derek met her eyes. "Would you have walked away?" Emma thought about the 16-hour shift she'd just worked, the pneumothorax patient she'd tubed without waiting for the attending, the countless times she'd put herself between chaos and catastrophe because someone had to. "No." "Then you know why I didn't." She finished wrapping his left arm in sterile gauze, her movements precise and gentle. "The commander said you called this in before the accident, that you told them about the diner." Derek looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. "Standard protocol. We check in with our team when we're traveling. I mentioned what happened. Hayes asked if I wanted him to handle it. I said no." He paused. "Then the crash happened, and I didn't have time to tell him to stand down." "So this wasn't planned." "The crash wasn't, but Hayes." Derek's mouth quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. "He doesn't do anything halfway. Once I ended up in this hospital, once he heard you were suspended, there was no stopping him." Emma taped down the final edge of gauze and stepped back. "Your commander threatened a federal investigation." He wasn't bluffing. "The hospital gets veteran care grants?" "Every major hospital in Colorado does. Federal funding, state partnerships, VA contracts." Derek's voice was getting heavier, the pain medication pulling him towards sleep. "If they're retaliating against staff for treating veterans with dignity, that's a violation of the grant terms. Hayes knows how to use leverage." Emma sank into the chair beside his bed. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was ebbing. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "Probably." Derek's eyes were already closing. "But you didn't start this fight, Emma. They did." She sat there until his breathing evened out, until the monitors settled into their steady rhythm, until the weight of what was happening finally crashed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. When she stepped out into the hallway, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was waiting. "How is he?" Hayes asked. "Stable. Burns are second degree, painful, but manageable. His lungs are clear despite the smoke inhalation. He'll need observation for the next 24 hours, but he should make a full recovery." Hayes nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good. That's good." "You didn't have to do this," Emma said. "Yeah, I did." Hayes crossed his arms. "Stone's one of the best operators I've ever served with. Lost his leg in Kandahar pulling wounded civilians out of a collapsed building. Saved 11 lives that day. Earned a Bronze Star and a medical retirement he didn't want." His jaw tightened. "He comes home, tries to get breakfast at a diner, and gets treated like he's invisible. Like he's an inconvenience. That doesn't fly with me." "And me?" "You're the only person in that diner who saw him as human. The only one who made space." Hayes' eyes were hard. "Then your hospital tries to punish you for it because some small-minded businessman got his ego bruised. You think I'm going to let that slide?" Emma swallowed hard. "The director said he'd resolve it." "Wells is a bureaucrat. He'll say whatever keeps the peace until he can figure out how to make this go away quietly." Hayes pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. It was a news article, already posted online. "Navy SEAL hero discriminated at local diner, suspended nurse saves his life." Hours later. The photo showed Derek being wheeled into the hospital, Emma visible in the background, her face set in concentration. Below it, a second photo, the SEALs standing in formation outside the emergency entrance. "This isn't going away quietly," Hayes said. "It's already trending on social media. Veterans groups are picking it up. By tonight, this will be national." Emma's stomach dropped. "I don't want to be famous." "Too bad. You're the face of this story now." Hayes pocketed his phone. "But you're not alone. My team stays until this is resolved. Anyone gives you trouble, you call me directly." He handed her a card with his number. "I mean it. Anyone." He walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor with the same measured cadence as his operators outside. Emma stared at the card in her hand. 24 hours ago, she'd been an ICU nurse with a suspended license and a quiet life. Now she was at the center of a media storm involving military special operations, hospital politics, and the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend and fellow nurse, Rachel Kim. "Holy shit, Em. You're on the news. Are you okay?" Then another, from a number she didn't recognize. "You're a hero. Thank you for standing up for our veterans." And another, "Stuck-up bitch. You just wanted attention. Hope you lose your job." Emma turned off her phone. By 6 p.m., the hospital's parking lot looked like a media circus. 7 news vans, reporters conducting interviews with anyone who'd talk, camera crews filming B-roll of the building's exterior. Hospital security had set up barricades to keep them away from the entrances, but they couldn't stop the coverage. Emma stayed in Derek's room, monitoring his condition, adjusting his medication, avoiding the windows. Dr. Waverly stopped by twice, said nothing about the suspension, and left again without meeting her eyes. Margaret Chen sent a terse email. "Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Your presence is required." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a summons. Emma was checking Derek's IV when the door opened and a woman in an expensive pantsuit walked in. She was in her 40s, blonde, with the kind of polished confidence that came from years of controlling narratives. "Miss Sharp, I'm Caroline Fletcher, Hospital Public Relations." She extended a hand that Emma didn't shake. "We need to talk about how you're going to handle media requests." "I'm not." Caroline blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not handling media requests. I'm not giving interviews. I'm not making statements." Emma kept her voice level. "I'm a nurse doing my job. That's all. With respect, this situation has escalated beyond your personal preferences. The hospital's reputation is at stake." "The hospital's reputation?" Emma turned to face her fully. "Your director suspended me for buying a veteran breakfast. Your board member's brother filed a bogus complaint because I called out his discrimination, and now you want me to help you spin this?" Caroline's smile tightened. "We want to present a unified front. Show that Riverside General supports both our staff and our veteran patients. Then reinstate me, publicly, and issue an apology to Chief Stone for what happened at that diner." "That's complicated." "No, it's simple. You're just more worried about protecting Vincent Desmond than doing the right thing." Caroline's professional mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. "Be very careful, Miss Sharp. You may have social media on your side right now, but public opinion is fickle. The hospital has lawyers, resources, connections. If you push too hard, you might find yourself not just suspended, but unemployable." Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check." "Then here's mine. I'm not scared of your lawyers or your connections or your carefully crafted PR statements. I did nothing wrong. And if you think you can bully me into silence, you're about to learn exactly how wrong you are." Caroline's jaw tightened. She turned and walked out without another word. Emma's hands were shaking again. She sat down, pressed her palms against her thighs, and forced herself to breathe. Behind her, Derek's voice was rough with sleep and medication. "You're tougher than you look." She turned. He was watching her, his eyes clearer than they'd been an hour ago. "I thought you were asleep." "Drifting in and out. Heard enough." He shifted, grimacing. "Fletcher's a piece of work. She tried to get me to sign a release form when they first brought me in. Something about not holding the hospital liable for pre-existing conditions." You're kidding. Wish I was. I told her where she could file it. Derek managed a weak grin. Hayes threatened to have his JAG officer review every form in this place. She left pretty quick after that. Emma felt something loosen in her chest, a laugh that was half exhaustion and half disbelief. This is insane. Yeah, Derek's expression sobered. But it's also important. What happened at that diner? That happens to veterans every day. We get thanked for our service, then treated like we're broken, or inconvenient, or too complicated to deal with. Most of the time, nobody notices. Nobody cares. He paused. You cared. And now people are paying attention. That matters. I just wanted to give you a seat. And that's exactly why this matters. The night shift arrived at 7. Emma should have left hours ago, but her suspension meant she wasn't technically on duty, and nobody seemed willing to tell her to go home. She stayed in Derek's room, updating his chart, monitoring his vitals, being useful in the only way she knew how. At 9:47 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Emma Sharp? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Who's asking? My name is Thomas Rivera. I'm an attorney with the Colorado Veterans Legal Alliance. I saw the news coverage. I'd like to offer you legal representation, pro bono. Emma closed her eyes. I'm not suing anyone. Not yet. But the hospital might come after you. Wrongful termination, breach of contract, defamation. They have options if they want to use them. You need someone in your corner. I can't afford... Pro bono means free, Miss Sharp. We represent veterans and those who support them. What you did today falls squarely in our wheelhouse. Rivera's tone was matter of fact. No pressure. Just information. I'm not asking you to commit to anything. I'm just saying if you need help, we're here. Emma thought about Caroline Fletcher's thinly veiled threats, about Vincent Desmond's connections, about the way power worked when you didn't have any. Can I think about it? Of course. I'll send you my contact information. If you need me, call. If you don't, no hard feelings. He hung up. Emma stared at her phone, feeling like she was being pulled into a current she couldn't control. At 11:03 p.m., a nurse from the ICU poked her head into Derek's room. Sharp, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Emma followed her downstairs, expecting another reporter or PR handler. Instead, she found herself face to face with Ralph Desmond. He stood in the lobby, his face flushed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The security guard nearby had one hand on his radio, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. You, Ralph spat. You ruined me. Emma stopped 3 feet away, her pulse spiking. I didn't do anything to you. My diner's been flooded with phone calls, protesters outside, people leaving one-star reviews online saying I discriminate against veterans. I've had to close early because someone threw a brick through my window. His voice rose. This is your fault. No, Emma said quietly. This is yours. You refused to seat a disabled veteran. You filed a bogus complaint to get me suspended. You made this mess. He was making people uncomfortable. He was trying to eat breakfast. The only person making anyone uncomfortable was you. Ralph took a step forward. The security guard moved instantly, blocking his path. Sir, you need to calm down. I want her fired. I want her arrested for slander. You need to leave, the guard said firmly. Now. Ralph's mouth worked, fury and desperation warring across his face. This isn't over. Yeah, Emma said. It is. Security escorted him out. Emma watched through the glass doors as he climbed into his car and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. The guard turned to her. You okay? Yeah, thanks. For what it's worth. He lowered his voice. Most of us staff are on your side. What you did was right. Emma managed a tired smile. Doesn't always feel like it. Rarely does. That's how you know it mattered. She went back upstairs, her legs heavy, her mind spinning. Derek was awake again, watching the news on the small TV mounted to the wall. The coverage showed footage of the diner, now surrounded by protesters holding signs. Veterans deserve respect. Shame on Anchor. Diner support. Nurse Sharp. Derek muted the TV. It's spreading. Like wildfire. Emma collapsed into the chair. Ralph Desmond just showed up. Threatened me. Security kicked him out. Derek's expression hardened. Hayes needs to know. It's fine. He's just angry. Angry people do stupid things. Derek reached for his phone on the bedside table, typed a quick message. Hayes will make sure you're covered. Emma wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she leaned back and closed her eyes, listening to the steady beep of the monitors, the distant sound of the hospital at night. You should go home, Derek said after a while. Get some sleep. I'm suspended. I don't have anywhere else to be. You're exhausted. You've been awake for, 30 hours? 32. Emma opened her eyes. But if I leave, something else will happen. Something I won't be able to control. At least here I can be useful? Yeah. Derek was quiet for a moment. My dad was a firefighter, retired after 26 years. He used to say the hardest part wasn't running into burning buildings. It was sitting still afterward, feeling useless. His voice was soft. You're not useless, Emma. Even when you're not working. Even when things are out of your control. Easy to say. Not really. He gestured to his missing leg. I spent 6 months in rehab learning how to walk again, how to be an operator with a prosthetic. The Navy told me I could take a medical discharge, collect my pension, go home. I fought for a year to stay on active duty. You know why? Emma shook her head. Because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't doing something, if I wasn't useful. Derek's eyes were distant. Took me a long time to learn that my value isn't just what I can do. It's who I am, what I stand for. And what do you stand for? Same thing you do, showing up, doing the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Emma felt something crack in her chest, the kind of crack that lets light in. I'm really glad I let you sit at my table. Me too. She stayed until he fell asleep again, then finally forced herself to leave. The parking lot was mostly empty now, the media vans gone except for one overnight crew filming a recap segment. Emma drove home through silent streets, her mind too wired for sleep despite her exhaustion. Her apartment felt strange and unfamiliar, like she'd been gone for weeks instead of hours. She showered, changed into pajamas, and was about to climb into bed when her phone lit up with a notification. An email. From Vincent Desmond. She opened it, her stomach nodding. Miss Sharp, I understand you believe you acted appropriately in your encounter with my brother and the subsequent events at Riverside General. However, you have caused significant reputational and financial harm to both his business and this hospital's standing in the community. I strongly advise you to consider the consequences of your continued involvement in this matter. A public apology and acknowledgement of wrongdoing would go a long way toward resolving this situation amicably. Failure to cooperate will result in the hospital pursuing all available legal and professional remedies, including permanent termination and potential civil action. Sincerely, Vincent Desmond, Board Director, Riverside General Hospital. Emma read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Thomas Rivera with a single line. I think I need that lawyer. His reply came in under 2 minutes. I'll be at the board meeting tomorrow. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't back down. Emma set her phone aside and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would determine everything, her career, her reputation, her future. The board would expect her to apologize, to make this go away quietly. But she thought about her father, who'd come home from war and been failed by a system that forgot him. About Derek, who'd lost his leg saving civilians and couldn't get a seat in a diner. About every veteran who'd been thanked for their service and then discarded like yesterday's news. She thought about the look on Ralph Desmond's face when he'd said Derek was making people uncomfortable. And she thought about the way Derek had looked at her in that diner, relieved and grateful, like someone had finally seen him as human. Emma turned off the light. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that boardroom. Tomorrow, she'd face Vincent Desmond and Director Wells and everyone who wanted her to disappear. Tomorrow, she'd stand her ground. But tonight, for just a few hours, she let herself fall into dreamless, exhausted sleep. The alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. Emma dressed carefully, professional but not submissive, a navy blazer over a white blouse, slacks, her hair pulled back. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked harder. Ready, She drove to the hospital early, parking in the employee lot. The morning sun was just starting to burn through the clouds, casting everything in sharp relief. She walked in through the main entrance, nodded to the security guard who'd helped her last night, and took the elevator to the third floor where the administrative offices were located. Thomas Rivera was waiting outside the boardroom. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, dark hair, sharp suit, and an expression that said he'd seen this kind of fight before. Emma Sharp? That's me. He shook her hand firmly. Thomas Rivera, ready? Not even a little. Good. Means you're paying attention. He gestured to the closed boardroom door. They're going to try to intimidate you. They'll use corporate language, veiled threats, maybe even fake sympathy. Don't fall for it. Stick to the facts. Don't apologize for anything, and let me handle the legal angles. What if they fire me? Then we sue. Wrongful termination, retaliation, violation of whistleblower protections. We'll bury them in paperwork. Rivera's smile was sharp. But they won't fire you. Not today. Not with the media watching. How can you be sure? Because I sent them a letter at 7 this morning outlining exactly what would happen if they did. Emma stared at him. Preemptive strike. Works every time. He checked his watch. It's 9. Time to go. Emma took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked into the boardroom. 8 people sat around a mahogany table, Director Wells at the head, Vincent Desmond to his right, Margaret Chen, 2 other board members Emma didn't recognize, Caroline Fletcher, and the hospital's chief legal counsel, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Ortiz. All eyes turned to Emma as she entered. Rivera followed, closing the door behind them. Wells folded his hands on the table. Miss Sharp, Mr. Rivera, thank you for joining us. Let's skip the pleasantries, Rivera said, sitting down and gesturing for Emma to do the same. We all know why we're here. Vincent Desmond's face reddened. This is a closed personnel meeting. Your presence is perfectly legal, given that your hospital sent my client a threatening email at midnight suggesting termination and civil action. Rivera pulled out a printed copy of Vincent's email. That constitutes potential wrongful termination and retaliation. Ms. Sharp has every right to legal representation. Patricia Ortiz cleared her throat. Mr. Desmond sent that email in his personal capacity, not as a representative of the hospital. Using his hospital email address and his title as board director. Try again. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Wells cleared his throat. Perhaps we can start fresh. Ms. Sharp, we've reviewed the events of the past 48 hours. The incident at the Anchor Diner, the complaint filed by Ralph Desmond, and the subsequent publicity. We want to understand your perspective. Emma met his eyes. My perspective is simple. I bought breakfast for a veteran who'd been turned away by everyone else in that diner. I was off duty, out of uniform, and acting as a private citizen. Then I was suspended because a board member's brother didn't like being called out for discriminating against a disabled Navy SEAL. Vincent slammed his hand on the table. My brother did not discriminate. He refused to seat Chief Petty Officer Derek Stone because of his disability and veteran status. He made it clear that Stone's presence was bad for business. Then he filed a false complaint to retaliate against me for standing up for him. Emma's voice was steady, each word precise. That's textbook discrimination. You have no proof. Actually, Rivera interrupted, we have security footage from the diner showing multiple empty tables and several customers turning Chief Stone away. We also have witness statements from other patrons, and we have Chief Stone's own testimony along with that of his commanding officer. Vincent's face went from red to purple. That footage is private property. Released by your brother's insurance company as part of their investigation into the brick-throwing incident. Public record now. Rivera smiled. Funny how these things work out. Wells raised a hand. Gentlemen, please, let's stay focused. He turned to Emma. Miss Sharp, regardless of the circumstances, your actions have created a significant public relations challenge for this hospital. We're receiving threats. Protests are planned outside the building, and our donors are asking questions. Then maybe you should have thought about that before suspending me. Margaret Chen spoke for the first time. Emma, nobody's questioning your clinical skills or your dedication, but you have to understand, this has become bigger than one incident. The hospital's reputation is built on treating patients with dignity and respect. Emma interrupted. Including veterans. If your reputation can't survive me doing the right thing, then maybe your reputation needs to be challenged. Caroline Fletcher leaned forward. We're prepared to offer you a compromise. Full reinstatement, back pay for your suspension, and a public statement supporting your actions. In return, we need you to make a joint appearance with Director Wells and Chief Stone, showing unity and putting this matter to rest. Emma glanced at Rivera. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. What about the complaint? Emma asked. We'll dismiss it with prejudice, Patricia Ortiz said. It'll be removed from your file entirely. And Vincent Desmond? Wells shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Desmond will recuse himself from any future personnel decisions involving you. That's not enough. Vincent shot to his feet. How dare you? Sit down, Rivera said calmly, or I'll have you removed for disrupting a formal meeting. You have no authority. Actually, I do. Miss Sharp is entitled to a fair and impartial hearing. Your presence creates a conflict of interest. Either recuse yourself from this entire proceeding, or I'll file a motion with the State Labor Board within the hour. Patricia whispered something to Wells. He nodded reluctantly. Vincent, perhaps it would be best if you stepped out. Vincent looked like he wanted to flip the table. Instead, he grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed diplomas on the wall. Wells exhaled slowly. Miss Sharp, what would it take to resolve this? Emma thought about Derek lying in a hospital bed upstairs, about her father, who'd deserved better, about every person who'd been dismissed or diminished because they weren't convenient enough, profitable enough, easy enough. Full reinstatement with back pay. Public apology from the hospital acknowledging that my suspension was unjustified. A formal investigation into the complaint process to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. She paused. And you establish a veteran care ombudsman position to handle complaints and ensure veterans are treated with dignity. Fund it properly. Staff it with someone who actually cares. Wells blinked. That's quite a list. Those are my terms. And if we refuse, Rivera spoke before Emma could, then we file suit for wrongful termination, retaliation, and violation of federal veteran care grant terms. We request a full audit of your grant compliance, and we make sure every veteran organization in the country knows that Riverside General punishes staff for treating veterans with respect. He leaned back in his chair. Your choice. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Patricia Ortiz looked at Wells. Wells looked at the other board members. Margaret Chen looked at Emma with something that might have been respect. Give us 15 minutes, Wells said finally. Emma and Rivera stepped out into the hallway. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. You did good, Rivera said. I think I'm going to throw up. Also normal? He checked his phone. By the way, you should know, there are about 50 veterans outside the hospital right now. They're planning a demonstration of support. Lieutenant Commander Hayes organized it. Emma's eyes went wide. What? He called me this morning, said if the hospital doesn't do right by you, his entire SEAL team is going to make this their personal mission, and he's got friends in the media. Rivera's expression was unreadable. You've got an army at your back, Emma. Literally. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. 12 minutes later, they were called back inside. Wells looked older, more tired. We accept your terms, full reinstatement, back pay, public apology. The investigation into complaint procedures will begin immediately, and will establish the veteran ombudsman position within 90 days. Emma felt her knees go weak. All of it? All of it? Wells's voice was flat. The formal announcement will be made this afternoon. We'll expect you at the press conference. One more thing, Patricia Ortiz said. Ralph Desmond has withdrawn his complaint and issued a public apology. His diner is facing legal action from multiple veteran advocacy groups. Vincent Desmond has resigned from the board, effective immediately. Emma sat down slowly, the weight of it hitting her all at once. She'd won. Not just the reinstatement, not just the apology. She'd changed the system. Rivera stood. We'll see you at the press conference, Director Wells. 3 p.m.? 3 p.m., Wells confirmed. Emma walked out of the boardroom in a daze. Rivera guided her to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor. How do you feel? He asked. Like I just survived something I didn't know I could survive. That's because you did. The elevator doors opened. Welcome to the other side. Emma stepped out into the lobby and froze. Through the glass doors, she could see them, dozens of veterans in uniform standing in formation on the hospital grounds. At the front stood Lieutenant Commander Hayes, flanked by his SEAL team. And in the center, supported by crutches but standing tall, was Derek Stone. They weren't protesting. They were waiting. For her. Emma pushed through the glass doors and the wall of sound hit her like a physical force. Not shouting, not chaos, silence. 73 veterans stood at attention in perfect formation across the hospital's front plaza. Morning sun glinted off medals, off prosthetics, off the kind of discipline that didn't fade even after the uniform came off. Some were young, barely out of their 20s. Others had gray hair and backs bent by decades of service. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. Different branches, different wars, united by a single purpose. Hayes stood front and center, his posture parade ground perfect. Beside him, Derek balanced on his crutches, his burns freshly bandaged, his face pale but determined. He shouldn't have been out of bed. His chart said bed rest for another 12 hours minimum. But here he was. Emma stopped 3 feet from the formation, her throat tight. Hayes spoke first, his voice carrying across the plaza without needing to shout. Nurse Emma Sharp, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command and every veteran standing here, we want you to know something. He took one step forward. You saw us when others looked away. You made space when others closed doors. You stood your ground when others tried to make you kneel. His eyes were steel and honor. That doesn't go unnoticed. That doesn't go unanswered. Derek shifted his weight, grimacing but steady. You saved my life twice, Emma. Once with kindness, once with your skills. I don't have the words to repay that. You don't owe me let me finish. Derek's voice was quiet but absolute. You reminded me that there are still people who see us as human, not damaged goods, not charity cases, not political statements. He paused, something raw crossing his face. Just people who deserve a seat at the table. Emma's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of cameras she could now see positioned on the periphery, reporters filming everything. Hayes continued. We understand you've been reinstated. We understand the hospital has agreed to changes. That's a victory. But victories don't happen in isolation. He gestured to the formation behind him. Every person here volunteered to stand with you today. To show this hospital, this city, and anyone watching that when someone stands up for veterans, we stand up for them. A woman in her 50s stepped forward from the third row, her left arm ending at the elbow. Former Army medic, Emma guessed from the way she carried herself. My name is Sarah Vance. I lost my arm in Baghdad, saving 3 soldiers from a burning Humvee. Came home to a country that thanked me for my service and then wouldn't hire me because I couldn't type fast enough. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. You're the first person I've seen in years actually fight back when the system tried to crush decency. That matters more than you know. One by one, others spoke. A Marine who'd lost both legs and had been denied entry to a restaurant because his wheelchair blocked the aisle. An Air Force pilot with PTSD who'd been fired from 3 jobs because employers deemed him unstable. A Navy corpsman who'd saved 19 lives in Kandahar and couldn't get a call back for a nursing position because her experience didn't translate to civilian medicine. Each story was a knife wound, each testimony a reminder of how badly the system failed the people who'd sacrificed everything for it. Emma listened, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. These weren't sob stories. These were battle reports, tactical assessments of a culture that praised service in the abstract and abandoned it in practice. When the last veteran finished speaking, Hayes raised his hand. The formation snapped to attention with a synchronization that made the plaza feel like hallowed ground. Nurse Sharp, we don't ask anything from you. You've already done more than most. Hayes' voice dropped, became personal. But if you're willing, we'd like to make sure what happened here becomes policy everywhere, not just Riverside General. Every hospital, every business, every place that accepts federal funding for veteran care. Emma found her voice. How? We've got lawyers, we've got advocacy groups, we've got congressional contacts who owe us favors. Hayes' smile was sharp. And we've got a story that's already trending nationally. We use it, we push legislation, we create accountability. You want me to be the face of a campaign. We want you to be the example, the proof that standing up works. Hayes tilted his head slightly. But only if you're willing. We won't force you into a fight you didn't choose. Emma looked at Derek, who watched her with quiet understanding. She thought about her father, who'd come home broken and been failed by every system meant to help him. About the young medic in the third row who'd lost her arm saving others and couldn't find work. About every person who'd been dismissed because their sacrifice wasn't convenient enough. What do you need from me? Hayes' expression shifted. Satisfaction mixed with something deeper. Respect. Show up. Tell your story. Let us amplify it. The rest, we handle. When? Press conference is at 3. After that, we've got congressional staffers reaching out for testimony. Advocacy groups want interviews, media requests from 6 different states. Hayes checked his watch. You've got 5 hours to decide how far you want to take this. Emma's mind raced. 5 hours ago, she'd been suspended, facing termination and a destroyed career. Now she was being offered a platform that could reach millions. The whiplash was dizzying, but underneath the fear and uncertainty was something else, something that felt like purpose. I need to check on my patients first, she said. Of course. Hayes stepped aside, the formation parting to create a path back to the hospital entrance. We'll be here when you're ready. Emma walked through the corridor of veterans, each one nodding or saluting as she passed. Derek caught her eye as she reached the door. You okay? He asked. Ask me in 5 hours. She went back inside, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and found Rachel Kim waiting by the nurse's station. Her friend's eyes were red-rimmed. Her expression were going to fire you. I thought, they were going to fire you. I thought, they tried. Emma hugged back hard. It didn't work. Rachel pulled away, studying her face. You look different. I feel different. Good different or about to collapse different? Both. Emma glanced at the board. Who's covering my patients? Waverly's been doing rounds himself, hasn't complained once. I think he's scared the SEALs are going to audit his clinical decisions. Rachel's smile was wicked. Also, Margaret wants to see you. She's in her office. Emma found Margaret Chen sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen like it held answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. The supervisor looked up when Emma knocked. Come in. Close the door. Emma obeyed, sat down without being invited. Margaret removed her reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose. I owe you an apology. Yes, you do. I should have fought harder when Vincent pushed for your suspension. I should have told Wells that the complaint was bogus. I should have... Margaret's voice cracked slightly. I should have remembered what it was like to be a nurse who gave a damn about doing the right thing instead of a supervisor who cared more about keeping the peace. Emma stayed silent. My sister's husband is a Marine, Margaret continued. 2 tours in Iraq. Came home with a traumatic brain injury and couldn't hold down a job because his memory was unreliable. He tried to get help through the VA and got lost in bureaucracy for 8 months. She met Emma's eyes. He killed himself 3 years ago. My sister found him in their garage. The air left the room. I'm sorry, Emma said quietly. I tell myself I did everything I could, that I supported my sister, that I understood, that I was there. Margaret's hands trembled. But when you stood up for Derek Stone, when you fought back against the system that tried to punish you for basic decency, I realized I've been complicit. I've been part of the problem. Margaret, no, let me finish. Margaret's voice steadied. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for permission to do better, to help you with whatever comes next, to make sure this hospital actually lives up to the promises Wells just made in that boardroom. Emma studied her supervisor. The exhaustion, the regret, the genuine determination underneath. What are you proposing? I want to head the Veteran Care Initiative. I want to build the Ombudsman program you demanded. I want to make sure no veteran ever gets treated the way Derek was treated. No staff member ever gets punished for doing the right thing. Margaret leaned forward. And I want you to help me. You've got credibility now. You've got attention. We use it to create real change, not just PR talking points. You're serious? Completely. Emma considered it. Margaret had failed her when it mattered most. But she was also offering something rare, acknowledgement and a concrete plan to make amends. I'll think about it, Emma said, after the press conference. Fair enough. Margaret pulled out a folder. In the meantime, you should know that Vincent Desmond didn't resign quietly. He's threatening legal action against the hospital for forcing him out. His lawyers are claiming retaliation, defamation, and breach of his board contract. Can he win? Probably not. But he can make noise, and noise means more media coverage, more scrutiny, more opportunities for things to get messy. Margaret slid the folder across the desk. These are the emails he sent to other board members over the past 6 months. Complaints about problematic staff, suggestions to tighten disciplinary procedures, proposals to reduce funding for veterans programs to balance the budget. Emma flipped through the pages, her stomach sinking. Vincent hadn't just been protecting his brother. He'd been systematically working to undermine anyone and anything that didn't serve his vision of profitable, conflict-free hospital management. This is evidence of a pattern. Exactly. Thomas Rivera already has copies. So does the State Labor Board investigator. Margaret's smile was grim. Vincent picked the wrong fight. Emma closed the folder. Thank you for this. Thank me by making sure this actually changes things. Margaret put her glasses back on. Now go. You've got a press conference to prepare for. Emma left the office and headed back to Derek's room. He was sitting up in bed watching the news coverage on his phone, his expression thoughtful. They're calling you the nurse who stood up, he said without looking up. Catchy. Embarrassing. Effective. Derek set his phone down. Hayes wants you to lead with emotion at the press conference. Talk about your father. Make it personal. I'm not using my dad's death for publicity. It's not publicity. It's context. Derek's voice was gentle but firm. People need to understand why you did what you did, why it mattered. Your father's story is part of that. Emma sat in the visitor's chair, her shoulders tight. He wouldn't want to be remembered as a victim. Then don't remember him that way. Remember him as a Marine who deserved better, as a man whose sacrifice should have meant something beyond a flag at his funeral. Derek shifted, wincing. You're telling his story to make sure other families don't go through what yours did. That's not exploiting his memory. That's honoring it. Emma closed her eyes, thought about her father's voice, his laugh, the way he taught her to read maps and navigate by stars, the slow decay after he came home, the pieces of him that disappeared bit by bit until there wasn't enough left to hold together. I don't know if I can talk about him without falling apart. Then fall apart. People need to see that this matters, that it's real. Derek's expression was understanding. You've been strong for 48 hours straight. It's okay to let people see the cost. At 2:30 p.m., Emma walked into the hospital's main conference room. It had been transformed into a media staging area. Microphones, cameras, lights hot enough to make her skin prickle. Director Wells stood near the podium, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Caroline Fletcher hovered nearby with talking points on a tablet. Thomas Rivera waited in the back row, arms crossed, watching everything with professional skepticism. And along the side wall, standing at parade rest, were Hayes and his team. Derek was there too, leaning heavily on his crutches but refusing to sit. Wells approached Emma, his voice low. We're going to make a brief statement acknowledging the complaint was unfounded, announcing your reinstatement, and outlining our new veteran care initiatives. Then you say a few words. Keep it gracious, keep it brief, and we move on. No, Emma said. Wells blinked. Excuse me? I'm not keeping it brief. I'm not keeping it gracious. I'm telling the truth about what happened and why it matters. Emma's voice was level. You can join me on that podium and own it, or you can step aside and I'll do it myself. But we're not spinning this into a feel-good PR moment. Wells's jaw tightened. Caroline looked horrified. Hayes from across the room nodded once. Miss Sharp. It's Nurse Sharp, Emma interrupted. And those are my terms. You agreed to transparency. This is what transparency looks like. Wells glanced at Caroline, who shook her head frantically. Then he looked at the cameras, at the reporters filling the front rows. at the veterans lining the wall like sentinels. "Fine," he said tightly. "But if this blows up in our faces, it won't." Emma moved toward the podium. "Not unless you've got more skeletons in your closet." Wells went pale. At exactly 3 p.m., the press conference began. Wells made his opening statement, wooden, carefully worded, hitting every approved talking point. The complaint was unfounded. Nurse Sharp had acted with professionalism and compassion. Riverside General was committed to serving veterans with dignity, blah, blah, blah. Then he stepped aside and Emma took the podium. The room went silent. She gripped the edges of the wooden lectern, felt the heat of the lights, saw the red recording indicators on a dozen cameras. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's phone buzzed. Emma took a breath. "My name is Emma Sharp. I've been an ICU nurse at Riverside General for 6 years. 2 days ago, I bought breakfast for a Navy SEAL named Derek Stone because every other person in the diner refused to let him sit down." She paused. "And for that act of basic human decency, I was suspended." The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking, voices overlapping in chaos. Wells looked like he wanted to crawl under the podium. Emma raised her hand and the noise died down. "I want to tell you why I did it, not because I'm a hero, not because I wanted attention, but because my father was a Marine." She told them about Staff Sergeant Daniel Sharp, about his service in Fallujah, about the Purple Heart he earned pulling wounded men from a burning vehicle, about the PTSD that went untreated because the VA was overwhelmed and underfunded, about the way he withdrew from the world, from his family, from himself. He died 6 years ago in a motel room, alone, forgotten by the country he'd served. Emma's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "When I saw Derek Stone standing in that diner, turned away by table after table, I saw my father. I saw every veteran who gets thanked for their service and then treated like an inconvenience, and I decided I wouldn't be part of that system anymore." A reporter in the front row had tears on her cheeks. Wells stared at the floor. Hayes stood motionless, his jaw tight. "This isn't about me. It's about a culture that praises sacrifice in speeches and ignores it in practice. It's about hospitals and businesses and institutions that take veteran care funding and then punish staff who actually try to provide that care." Emma's hands were steady now, her voice clear. "Riverside General tried to silence me because it was easier than confronting their own failures. They failed." She looked directly at the camera from the largest network station. "To every veteran watching this, you deserve better. To every healthcare worker who's been told to stay quiet about injustice, speak up anyway. To every person who's ever wondered if standing up matters, it does. It always does." Emma stepped back from the podium. The room exploded with questions. "What happens next? Are you suing the hospital? What do you say to Vincent Desmond?" Emma ignored them all. She walked past Wells, past Caroline's horror-struck expression, past Rivera's approving nod. She walked straight to Derek. "How'd I do?" she asked quietly. "You just changed the conversation." Derek's smile was genuine. "Well done." Hayes moved in, his voice low enough that only Emma and Derek could hear. "We've got congressional staffers waiting to talk to you. 3 veteran advocacy organizations want you for their campaigns, and the VA Secretary's office just reached out." Emma's head spun. "The VA Secretary? Apparently she's a Navy veteran herself. She wants to use your story to push for funding increases and reform legislation." Hayes' expression was unreadable. "You just became the most valuable asset the veteran community has had in years." "I don't want to be an asset. I want to be a nurse." "Then be both." Hayes gestured to the chaos behind them. "You've got leverage now. Use it to make sure other nurses don't get punished for doing their jobs. Use it to make sure other veterans don't get turned away from diners and businesses. Use it to matter." Emma looked back at the press conference. Wells was trying to regain control, stammering through non-answers. Reporters were already typing on their phones, filing stories that would go live within minutes. Outside the windows, she could see more veterans gathering. Word had spread, bringing people from across the state to stand in solidarity. "This is going to get bigger, isn't it?" she said. "Much bigger." Derek adjusted his crutches. "Question is, are you ready for it?" Emma thought about her father, about the way he'd taught her to stand her ground, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." The next 3 hours were a blur. Interviews with sympathetic reporters, conference calls with advocacy groups, a private meeting with 2 congressional aides who promised to introduce legislation requiring transparency in veteran care complaints. Rivera handled the legal angles. Hayes coordinated media strategy. Margaret Chen took notes and made plans for the hospital's new ombudsman program. By 7 p.m., Emma was exhausted down to her bones. She was in a private office, drinking terrible coffee and reviewing talking points for a morning show interview when Rachel burst in. "Em, you need to see this." Rachel turned on the TV. The local news was covering a developing story. Ralph Desmond's diner was burning. Flames poured from the windows, black smoke billowing into the evening sky. Fire crews battled the blaze while police held back crowds. The news anchor's voice was tense. Authorities are investigating whether this fire is connected to ongoing protests against the Anchor Diner, following allegations of discrimination against a disabled Navy SEAL. The fire department reports that accelerants were found at the scene, suggesting possible arson. Emma's coffee cup slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Oh no," she whispered. Rachel grabbed her arm. "Em, people are going to blame you. They're going to say the protests went too far, that you incited violence." "I didn't." But Emma's mind was already racing through the implications. The veterans who'd stood outside the diner with signs. The angry phone calls Ralph had mentioned. The brick through his window. Someone had taken it too far. And she was about to become responsible for it, whether she'd intended it or not. The office door opened. Hayes stood there, his expression grim. "We've got a problem," he said. "I saw. It's worse than you think." Hayes pulled up something on his phone, showed her. It was a social media post from an anonymous account. "Justice for veterans. Burn the bigots out." Attached was a photo of Ralph Desmond's diner with a target painted over it. "When was this posted?" Emma asked, her voice hollow. 3 hours ago, before the fire started." Hayes's jaw was tight. "Police are going to want to talk to you. Media is going to ask if you condone this. Vincent Desmond is already calling it terrorism." Emma sank into a chair. In 48 hours, she'd gone from suspended nurse to national symbol to potential scapegoat for arson. "I never wanted this," she said. "I know." Hayes crouched beside her chair. "But wanting doesn't matter now. What matters is how you respond. How do I respond to something I didn't do? Something I never asked for? By being clear about where you stand. By condemning violence while maintaining your position on the discrimination issue. By refusing to let this derail the actual conversation." Hayes's voice was firm. "You didn't set that fire, Emma. Some angry idiot did. Don't let them turn you into the villain." But Emma knew how these things worked. She'd watched enough news cycles to understand that nuance died in sound bites, that complex situations got reduced to tribal battles, that the story would become Nurses' Crusade leads to arson instead of veteran discrimination exposed. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello? Emma Sharp?" The voice was male, controlled, professional. "This is Detective Marcus Wright with Millbrook City Police. I need you to come down to the station for a statement regarding the fire at Anchor Diner." Emma's heart hammered. "Am I being charged with something?" "Not at this time, but we're investigating possible connections between the protests you've been associated with and tonight's arson. Your cooperation would be appreciated. I'll be there within the hour." She hung up. Hayes was already on his phone, calling Rivera. Rachel paced the small office, her face pale. Emma stood, smoothed her blazer, and forced herself to think clearly. She hadn't set the fire. She hadn't called for violence. She'd called for accountability and dignity. But someone had twisted her message into justification for destruction, and now she had to face the consequences of a movement she'd never meant to start. The police station was a squat brick building downtown, its parking lot flooded with media vans and protesters on both sides, veterans supporting Emma, local business owners condemning the arson. Emma walked through the gauntlet with Hayes and Rivera flanking her, cameras tracking every step. Inside, Detective Wright was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. He led them to an interview room, gestured for Emma to sit. "For the record, you're here voluntarily," Wright said. "You're not under arrest. You can leave at any time." "Noted," Rivera said, sitting beside Emma. Wright opened a file. "Tell me about your relationship with Ralph Desmond." "I don't have one. I met him once at his diner 2 days ago." "And what happened during that meeting?" Emma recounted the story, Derek being turned away, her sharing her table, Ralph's comment in the parking lot. She kept her voice steady, clinical, like she was reporting a patient's symptoms. Wright took notes. "And after that?" "He filed a complaint with my hospital. I was suspended. Then the story went public." Emma met his eyes. "I had nothing to do with what happened to his diner." "Did you encourage protests?" "No. Veterans organized themselves. I wasn't involved." "But you benefited from the publicity," Rivera cut in. "Detective, is my client being accused of something specific, or are we fishing?" Wright leaned back. "Someone set fire to Ralph Desmond's business. That same business was the center of protests stemming from Miss Sharp's allegations. I'm trying to establish whether there's a connection." "The connection is that Ralph Desmond discriminated against a disabled veteran and then tried to retaliate against the person who called him out," Emma said quietly. "What happened tonight is awful. It's criminal, and I condemn it completely. But it's not my fault. Tell that to Ralph Desmond. He's in the hospital being treated for smoke inhalation. He went back inside to try to save his restaurant." Emma's stomach turned. "Is he okay?" "He'll survive, but his business is gone. 30 years of work destroyed." Wright's expression was hard. "You say you wanted accountability. Well, this is what accountability looks like to some people." "That's not accountability," Emma said, her voice rising. "That's vigilante violence. That's the exact opposite of what I stand for." "Then you need to say that, publicly, before someone else gets hurt." Emma stood. "Am I free to go?" Wright nodded. "For now, but we'll be in touch." She walked out of the police station into a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. Emma stopped on the steps, Hayes and Rivera behind her. "I'll make a statement," she said. Rivera's hand landed on her shoulder. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The reporter surged forward. Emma held up her hand, waited for silence. "I want to be absolutely clear about something. What happened to the Anchor Diner tonight was wrong. It was criminal, and I condemn it without reservation." Her voice carried across the parking lot. "I stood up for Chief Derek Stone because he deserved to be treated with dignity. I fought back against my suspension because the system was unjust, but I never, ever called for violence." A reporter shouted, "Do you take responsibility for the protesters' actions?" "I take responsibility for my own actions. I can't control what other people do in my name." Emma's hands clenched. "But to anyone who thinks arson or intimidation or violence serves the veteran community, you're wrong. You're hurting the cause, and you need to stop." "What about Ralph Desmond?" "I hope he recovers. I hope he learns something from this experience. But I will not apologize for calling out discrimination just because someone else took things too far." She turned and walked to Hayes's truck, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. Inside the vehicle, the silence was heavy. "That was good," Rivera finally said. "Direct, condemning the violence without backing down from your position. The media will eat it up." "I don't care what the media thinks," Emma said. "Someone almost died tonight." "Yeah." Hayes pulled out of the parking lot. "And tomorrow, we figure out who's responsible." They drove back to the hospital where Derek was waiting in his room, watching news coverage on his tablet. He looked up when Emma entered. "You okay?" he asked. "No?" Emma collapsed into the visitor's chair. "This is spiraling. I just wanted to do the right thing, and now there's arson and police investigations, and people are getting hurt." "That's not on you, isn't it? If I hadn't made a scene, if I just paid for breakfast and walked away, then Ralph Desmond would still be discriminating against veterans. Your hospital would still be retaliating against staff who speak up, and nothing would change." Derek set his tablet aside. "You lit a match, Emma. Other people poured gasoline. That's not the same thing." Emma put her head in her hands. "I don't know how to do this. How to be the person everyone thinks I am." "You don't have to be. You just have to be yourself. The same person who shared her table and stood her ground." "And if that's not enough?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then we figure it out together. Emma looked up, saw the exhaustion on his face, the pain he was pushing through, the determination underneath it all. You should be resting, she said. So should you. Touché. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you're a hero? You're just a troublemaker who destroyed an innocent man's livelihood. Watch your back. Emma stared at the message, her blood going cold. Then another text came through. And another. All threatening. All anonymous. All filled with the kind of rage that didn't care about truth or nuance or justice. Derek saw her expression. What is it? Emma showed him the phone. His face went hard. Hayes needs to see this. Now. Within 20 minutes, Hayes had coordinated with hospital security to establish a protective detail. 2 of his team members would rotate shifts outside Emma's apartment. The police were notified about the threats. Rivera started paperwork for a restraining order against unknown parties. But the damage was done. Emma Sharp, the nurse who'd stood up for a veteran, was now a target. And somewhere in Millbrook City, someone was watching, waiting, planning their next move. The threats didn't stop. By midnight, Emma had received 47 messages across 3 different platforms: text, email, social media. Some were crude and vulgar. Others were disturbingly specific, mentioning her apartment address, her car, the route she took to work. Hayes' security team cataloged each one, forwarding everything to Detective Wright and the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. Emma sat in Derek's hospital room because her own apartment felt too exposed, too vulnerable. The SEAL operators outside her door were professionals, but their presence was a constant reminder that she'd become someone who needed armed protection. You should try to sleep, Derek said from his bed. The pain medication had worn off enough that he was alert, watching her with concern. Can't. Emma scrolled through her phone, then forced herself to stop. Every time I close my eyes, I see that diner burning. I hear Detective Wright saying Ralph almost died trying to save it. That wasn't your fault. Everyone keeps saying that. Emma set her phone down. But if I hadn't bought you breakfast, if I hadn't fought back against the suspension, none of this would have happened. You're right. Ralph Desmond would still be discriminating against veterans. Your hospital would still be punishing staff for basic decency. And I'd still be just another disabled vet people look through instead of at. Derek shifted carefully, mindful of his burns. You think I wanted this circus? I called Hayes to check in, not to start a war. But once it started, once people saw what was happening, there was no putting it back in the box. So what do we do now? We find out who set the fire. We prove it wasn't connected to the legitimate protests. And we don't let the people who want you silenced use this as an excuse to shut down the conversation. Emma's laugh was bitter. That's all? For tonight? Yeah. Derek's expression softened. Tomorrow, we keep fighting. But right now, you need rest. She finally dozed off around 2 a.m., curled in the visitor's chair with a hospital blanket draped over her shoulders. When she woke 3 hours later, dawn was bleeding through the window, and Hayes was standing in the doorway. We've got a lead on the arson, he said quietly. Emma sat up, her neck stiff from the awkward sleeping position. What kind of lead? Security footage from a business across the street caught someone approaching the diner at 6:47 p.m. with a gas can. Police are enhancing the image now, but preliminary identification suggests it might be someone with a prior connection to Ralph Desmond. A connection how? Hayes pulled out his phone, showed her a grainy photo. A man in dark clothing, face partially obscured by a hood, carrying what looked like a red plastic container. Detective Wright thinks it could be an employee Ralph fired 3 months ago. Guy named Marcus Webb. He's got a criminal record. Assault, vandalism, did 6 months for setting his ex-girlfriend's car on fire. Emma's stomach dropped. So this wasn't about the protests at all. Probably not. Webb had his own grudge. The protests just gave him cover to act on it. Hayes pocketed his phone. Wright's bringing him in for questioning this morning. If he's the one, this takes the heat off you and puts it back where it belongs, on a criminal with a vendetta. Relief flooded through Emma, so intense it made her dizzy. When will they know for sure? Few hours, maybe less if Webb cracks under questioning. Hayes glanced at Derek, who was awake and listening. In the meantime, you've got a problem. Just one? Emma's voice was dry. Vincent Desmond held a press conference at 6 a.m., claimed you incited violence against his family's business, demanded you be fired, arrested, and prosecuted for domestic terrorism. The relief evaporated. He what? Hayes pulled up a video on his phone. Vincent stood behind a podium, his face red with righteous fury, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. His voice was trembling with barely controlled rage. Emma Sharp's reckless accusations and inflammatory rhetoric created an environment where violence against my family became acceptable. My brother almost died trying to save his life's work. This is the direct result of her campaign of harassment and defamation. The camera cut to a reporter. Mr. Desmond, are you saying Nurse Sharp is responsible for the arson? I'm saying her actions created the conditions for it. She painted a target on my brother's back, and now he's paying the price. I demand full accountability. The video ended. Emma stared at the screen, fury rising like bile in her throat. He's blaming me publicly while knowing the police have a suspect, she said. He doesn't care about facts. He cares about controlling the narrative. Hayes' voice was hard. Vincent's trying to salvage his reputation by making you the villain. If he can convince enough people that you're dangerous, unstable, a radical who incites violence, then his forced resignation looks justified. He becomes the victim instead of the corrupt board member who tried to silence you. Derek spoke up from the bed. He's also trying to scare you into backing down. If you retreat, apologize, disappear, his story wins. I'm not backing down. Emma's jaw was set. Rivera needs to respond. Now. By 8 a.m., Thomas Rivera had organized a counter-press conference outside the hospital. Emma stood at the podium flanked by Hayes, Derek in a wheelchair beside her, and a line of veterans behind them. Her hands gripped the lectern, knuckles white. Vincent Desmond is a liar, she said, her voice cutting through the morning air. He's lying about my role in the arson. He's lying about his reasons for resigning from the hospital board. And he's lying about his commitment to veterans. The reporters surged forward, cameras clicking. Police have identified a suspect in the Anchor Diner fire, a former employee with a personal grudge and a criminal history of arson. This had nothing to do with the protests, nothing to do with veteran advocacy, and nothing to do with me. Emma's voice rose. Vincent Desmond knows this, but he's desperate to make himself the victim because the truth is too damaging. She pulled out a folder, held it up. These are internal hospital emails showing Vincent Desmond systematically worked to reduce veteran care funding, tighten disciplinary procedures against staff who advocated for patients, and protect his brother's discriminatory business practices. He didn't resign because of public pressure. He resigned because he was about to be exposed. Ati, a reporter, shouted, "How did you obtain internal hospital emails?" They were provided by hospital administration as part of the investigation into my suspension. Everything here is legitimate and verified. Emma set the folder down. Vincent Desmond tried to silence me when I stood up for a veteran. When that failed, he tried to destroy my career. When that failed, he's trying to paint me as a terrorist. But I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the truth. She stepped back. Rivera moved to the microphone. My client has been fully cooperative with law enforcement. She has condemned the arson unequivocally, and she will not be intimidated by Vincent Desmond's baseless accusations. Rivera's voice was razor sharp. Furthermore, we are filing a defamation lawsuit against Mr. Desmond for his false and malicious statements. He wants accountability? He's about to get it. The press conference dissolved into chaos. Emma walked back inside with Hayes and Derek, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. That was a declaration of war, Derek said quietly. Good. Emma's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm done playing defense. By noon, the story had shifted. News outlets were reporting on the arrest of Marcus Webb, who'd been picked up at his apartment with evidence linking him to the arson, gas receipts, a burner phone with texts discussing making Ralph pay, and traces of accelerant on his clothes. His interrogation was ongoing, but sources said he was already admitting to setting the fire. Vincent's narrative collapsed in real time. Social media turned on him, dragging up his history of controversial board decisions and failed business ventures. Former hospital staff came forward anonymously, describing a pattern of retaliation against anyone who challenged his authority. By 2 p.m., Vincent's lawyers released a statement claiming he'd been misinformed about the facts and regretted any confusion. No apology, No acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just corporate doublespeak designed to minimize damage. Emma was in the hospital cafeteria, forcing down a sandwich she couldn't taste, when Margaret Chen found her. "The board met this morning," Margaret said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Emergency session. And?" "They voted unanimously to accept Vincent's resignation, effective immediately. They also approved full funding for the Veteran Care Ombudsman program and issued a formal apology to you and Chief Stone." Margaret's expression was cautious. "Wells wants you to know that the hospital stands behind you completely." "Wells wants me to know that he's covering his ass completely," Emma corrected. "2 days ago, he was ready to throw me under the bus. Now I'm a hero because it's politically convenient." "You're not wrong," Margaret's voice dropped. "But the Ombudsman program is real, the funding is real, and I meant what I said about wanting to make this work. We've got an opportunity to change things here. Don't waste it being angry at people who were wrong." Emma studied her supervisor. The exhaustion was still there, but so was something else: determination, purpose. "Tell Wells I'll work with the program," Emma said finally. "But I'm not doing any joint appearances with him. I'm not playing nice for the cameras." "Fair enough." Margaret stood. "For what it's worth, you've already changed more in 3 days than I changed in 6 years. That matters." Emma watched her leave, then pushed her uneaten sandwich away. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Turn on Channel 7, now." Emma pulled up the live stream on her phone. The news anchor's face was grim. "Breaking news in the Millbrook veteran discrimination case. We've just received information that Ralph Desmond, owner of the Anchor Diner, has filed a lawsuit against his brother Vincent Desmond, claiming Vincent pressured him to file the false complaint against nurse Emma Sharp." Emma's breath caught. The anchor continued. "According to court documents, Ralph Desmond alleges his brother threatened to withdraw financial support for the diner unless Ralph cooperated with a scheme to discredit Nurse Sharp and protect the Desmond family's business interests. Ralph is seeking damages and a formal apology, claiming Vincent used him as a pawn in a personal vendetta." The screen cut to footage of Ralph Desmond leaving a lawyer's office, his face haggard but resolute. A reporter thrust a microphone at him. "Mr. Desmond, why are you coming forward now?" Ralph stopped, his voice rough from smoke damage. "Because I almost died in that fire. And sitting in that hospital bed, I had time to think about what I'd done. About the veteran I turned away. About the nurse I tried to destroy because my brother told me to." He paused, his throat working. "I was wrong. Vincent used me. And I let him because I was scared and desperate and stupid. Do you stand by your original complaint?" "No, it was a lie, all of it." Ralph looked directly at the camera. "Emma Sharp did nothing wrong. Chief Stone deserved better. And I'm sorry." The feed cut back to the anchor. Emma stared at her phone, the words not quite processing. Ralph had turned on his own brother. The man who'd started this entire nightmare was now dismantling it piece by piece. Derek appeared in the cafeteria doorway, his crutches clicking against the tile floor. He navigated to Emma's table and lowered himself into a chair with practiced efficiency. "You saw?" he asked. "Yeah." Emma's voice was hollow. "Vincent's done." "He's been done since you stood up at that press conference. This just makes it official." Emma's phone rang, Rivera's name on the screen. She answered. "Did you see Ralph's lawsuit?" Rivera asked without preamble. "Just now." "This changes everything. Ralph's willing to testify that Vincent coerced him into filing the false complaint. That's conspiracy, fraud, abuse of power. The DA's office is opening a criminal investigation." Rivera's voice carried barely suppressed satisfaction. "Vincent Desmond is going to face charges. Real ones." "What about Ralph?" "Depends on how cooperative he is. If he testifies against Vincent, the DA might offer immunity or reduce charges for filing the false complaint. If he doesn't..." Rivera paused. "He's already lost his business and almost his life. My guess is he'll take whatever deal keeps him out of prison." Emma closed her eyes. "This is really happening. It's really happening. You won, Emma, completely." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching a house collapse in slow motion, knowing people were buried in the rubble. "What happens next?" she asked. "We wait for Vincent's arrest." We prepare for the criminal trial if it goes that far. And we make sure the reforms at Riverside General actually stick. Rivera's tone shifted. You should also know that 3 other hospitals in Colorado have reached out. They want to implement similar veteran care programs. You've started something bigger than Millbrook. Emma hung up and sat in silence, Derek watching her carefully. You okay? He asked. I don't know what okay is anymore. That's normal. Derek reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. You did something most people never have the courage to do. You stood up when standing up had consequences. You didn't back down when the system tried to crush you. And you won. People got hurt. Some of them deserved it, some didn't. That's not on you. Derek's voice was gentle but firm. You can't control how other people react to the truth. You can only control whether you tell it. Emma looked at him. This man who'd lost his leg in service, who'd been turned away from a diner like garbage, who'd become an unlikely ally in a fight neither of them had chosen. Thank you, she said quietly, for calling Hayes, for standing with me, for not letting me quit when it got hard. You wouldn't have quit. You're not built that way. Derek's smile was soft. But you're welcome anyway. The rest of the day unfolded in surreal slow motion. Vincent Desmond was arrested at his home at 4 p.m., charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of power, and filing false official documents. The mugshot was everywhere within an hour, his face red and furious, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully cultivated image shattered. Hospital administration released a statement reiterating their support for Emma and announcing the immediate implementation of the veteran care reforms. Wells gave an interview expressing his deep regret for the initial suspension and his pride in Emma's courage. Emma ignored it all. She returned to Derek's room, helped him with his evening medications, checked his burns, and pretended that everything hadn't fundamentally changed. At 7 p.m., Hayes knocked on the door. We need to talk, he said. Emma followed him to a private consultation room. Hayes closed the door, his expression serious. The Navy wants to present you and Derek with commendations, he said. Official recognition for your actions. There'll be a ceremony, press coverage, the whole 9 yards. Emma shook her head. I don't want a ceremony. It's not about what you want. It's about visibility. If the Navy publicly honors you, it sends a message to every hospital, every business, every institution that takes federal veteran funding, treat veterans and their advocates with respect, or face consequences. Hayes crossed his arms. This is bigger than you now. It's policy. It's precedent. I'm not a symbol. I'm a nurse who bought someone breakfast. You were a nurse who bought someone breakfast. Now you're the person who proved that one act of decency can change a system. Hayes's voice softened slightly. I know you didn't sign up for this, but you're here. And you can either let other people define what it means, or you can help shape it. Emma thought about the veterans who'd stood in formation outside the hospital, about the advocacy groups calling for legislation, about the hospitals reaching out to implement reform. What would the ceremony involve, she asked. 4 hours? Naval station ceremony, formal uniform for Derek, business attire for you. Secretary of the Navy presents commendations, speeches, photos, press availability. Hayes pulled out his phone, showed her a draft schedule. You don't have to give a speech if you don't want to. Just show up, accept the commendation, let the moment happen. When? 1 week. Gives Derek time to heal, gives media time to build anticipation, gives us time to coordinate with congressional allies who want to be there. Emma studied the schedule, her mind racing through implications. If she said no, the story ended here. Local news, small reforms, limited impact. If she said yes, it became national, legislative, permanent. I'll do it, she said. On one condition. Name it. Every veteran who stood outside this hospital gets invited. Every person who spoke up, who shared their story, who made this possible. They don't stand in the background. They stand with us. Hayes' smile was sharp and approving. Done. The next 5 days blurred together. Emma returned to work at Riverside General, where she was greeted with a mixture of hero worship and carefully neutral professionalism. Some staff members thanked her. Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the attention she'd brought to the hospital's failings. She didn't care. She had patients to care for, protocols to follow, work to do. Derek was discharged on day 3, his burns healing well enough to continue treatment outpatient. He'd be staying in Millbrook for another week for the ceremony, then returning to Virginia. Emma found herself simultaneously relieved and disappointed at the thought of him leaving. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm: morning coffee before she left for her shift, evening check-ins when she got home, texts throughout the day about nothing important. It felt natural in a way that relationships rarely did for Emma. "You'll keep in touch, right?" she asked the night before the ceremony, sitting on her couch while Derek occupied the armchair. His leg was propped up, his prosthetic removed for the evening. "Try to stop me." Derek's expression was warm. "Besides, Hayes is already talking about making you an honorary member of the team. You're stuck with us now." "I could think of worse fates." "So could I." The silence that followed was comfortable, weighted with things neither of them was quite ready to say. The ceremony took place at the Colorado National Guard facility outside Millbrook, a sprawling complex that had been transformed for the occasion. Flags lined the entrance, honor guards stood at attention. Media platforms had been erected along the perimeter. Emma wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She felt exposed and self-conscious, but Hayes had been right. This wasn't about her comfort. It was about sending a message. Derek stood beside her in his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, his prosthetic leg visible below his hemline. He'd insisted on being transparent about his injury, on making it part of the narrative rather than something to hide. Behind them, 73 veterans formed up in formation: Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, National Guard. Different ages, different backgrounds, united by service and the recognition that what had happened in Millbrook mattered. The Secretary of the Navy was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a presence that commanded attention. She approached the podium with military precision. "We are here today to recognize 2 individuals whose actions exemplify the values we hold sacred: courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right." Her voice carried across the assembled crowd. Chief Petty Officer Derek Stone and Nurse Emma Sharp reminded this nation that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off, that dignity isn't negotiable, that one person standing up can change everything. She called Derek forward first. He moved to the podium on his crutches, stood at attention as she pinned the commendation to his uniform. "For exceptional courage in rescuing 3 civilians from a burning vehicle, risking your own life to save others, and for your continued dedication to veteran advocacy, I present you with the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal." The crowd erupted in applause. Derek saluted, his back straight, his expression controlled. Then Emma's name was called. She walked to the podium on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The secretary smiled at her, something genuine in her eyes. "Emma Sharp, for your extraordinary advocacy on behalf of veterans, your courage in standing against institutional injustice, and your unwavering commitment to dignity and respect for those who serve, I present you with the Department of the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award." She pinned the medal to Emma's jacket. Emma stared at it. Heavy, ornate, completely surreal. "Thank you," she managed. "No," the secretary said quietly, "just for Emma. Thank you." The ceremony concluded with a formation salute from the assembled veterans. Emma and Derek stood at the center, medals gleaming, cameras flashing, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a mantle. Afterward, during the reception, Emma was approached by a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a congressman's pin on her lapel. "Representative Susan Matthews," the woman introduced herself. "I wanted you to know that I'm sponsoring legislation based on what happened here. The Veterans Dignity Act, requiring transparency in veteran care complaints, establishing federal protections for staff who advocate for veterans, and mandating ombudsman programs at any facility receiving veteran care funding." Emma's eyes widened. "That's significant. It's necessary. What Vincent Desmond did, what your hospital tried to do, it happens all the time, quietly, without consequences." Matthew's expression was fierce. "You made it loud. You made it visible. Now we make it illegal. When does it go to vote?" 3 months, if we can gather enough support. I'd like you to testify when it does. Your story carries weight that statistics never will." Emma thought about her father, about Derek, about every veteran who'd stood outside the hospital and shared their stories of being dismissed and forgotten. "I'll be there," she said. The reception lasted another 2 hours. Emma shook hands, posed for photos, answered the same questions over and over with patient professionalism. Derek stayed close, a steady presence when the attention became overwhelming. Finally, as the crowd thinned, they found themselves standing alone near the edge of the venue, looking out over the Colorado landscape painted gold by the setting sun. "You did good today," Derek said. "We did good," Emma corrected. "None of this happens without you. None of this happens without you being brave enough to share a table." Emma laughed, exhausted and exhilarated. "Best breakfast of my life." "Mine too." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Emma's phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID made her pause. "Detective Wright," she answered. "Hello? Miss Sharp, I wanted to inform you that Marcus Webb has been formally charged with arson and attempted murder. He's pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. The case is closed." "And Ralph Desmond?" "He's testifying against his brother. DA's office is offering immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Vincent Desmond will face trial in 6 weeks. Wright paused. "You should also know that Ralph asked me to pass along a message. He knows you'll never forgive him, but he wanted you to know he's sold what's left of the diner property and donated the proceeds to a veterans organization, for whatever that's worth." Emma closed her eyes. "Thank you for telling me." She hung up. Derek raised an eyebrow. "Webb confessed. Ralph's cooperating. Vincent's going to trial." "It's really over." "Yeah." Emma's voice was quiet. "It's really over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The immediate crisis was resolved, but the work was just beginning. The legislation, the reforms, the slow, grinding process of changing a culture that had treated veterans as disposable. She thought about Representative Matthews' bill, about the hospitals reaching out for guidance, about the veterans who'd stood in formation, waiting for someone to see them. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Emma turned to Derek, words forming on her lips. Something about staying in touch, about not letting this moment fade, about the strange connection they'd forged in crisis. But before she could speak, Hayes appeared, his expression urgent. "We've got a situation," he said. Emma's stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" Hayes pulled out his phone, showed her a news alert. "Veteran denied service at Phoenix Hospital. Staff member suspended for speaking out." The headline was almost identical. The circumstances eerily familiar. "They're asking for you," Hayes said. "The suspended staff member, the veteran, the advocacy groups. They want to know if you'll help them fight back." Emma looked at Derek. He met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. "What do you think?" she asked. Derek's smile was slow and certain. "I think we're just getting started." Emma turned back to Hayes, her exhaustion evaporating, replaced by something that felt like purpose crystallizing into action. "Tell them yes," she said. "We're on our way." The flight to Phoenix left at 6 a.m. Emma sat in the window seat, watching Colorado disappear beneath clouds that looked like spilled cotton. Derek occupied the aisle seat, his prosthetic leg extended into the extra space Hayes had somehow secured. The SEAL commander sat one row back, already working his phone, coordinating with contacts in Arizona. "You didn't have to come," Emma said quietly. Derek didn't look up from the case file Hayes had provided. "Yeah, I did." The file told a story that could have been copy-pasted from Millbrook. A Navy veteran named Adrian Torres, medically discharged after losing vision in his left eye during a training accident, had shown up at Phoenix Memorial Hospital's emergency department with severe abdominal pain. The triage nurse, Jessica Reeves, 28, 3 years on the job, had flagged his symptoms as potentially serious and advocated for immediate imaging. The attending physician, Dr. Kenneth Marsh, had overruled her, told Torres to take antacids and go home, told Reeves she was overreacting to a veteran looking for pain medication. Torres collapsed in the parking lot 20 minutes later. Emergency surgery revealed a ruptured appendix that had gone septic. He nearly died. Jessica Reeves filed an internal complaint about Marsh's negligence and the discriminatory assumptions that had nearly cost Torres his life. 2 days later, she was suspended for insubordination and unprofessional conduct. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. Marsh has been practicing for 32 years, Hayes said, leaning forward between the seats. Multiple complaints about dismissive treatment of minority and veteran patients. Nothing ever stuck because he's got connections. His father-in-law sits on the hospital board. Emma's jaw tightened. Let me guess. The board is protecting him. Aggressively, they're calling Reeves a troublemaker, suggesting she fabricated the discrimination angle to cover her own mistakes. Hayes' expression was hard. Torres is still in recovery, Reeves is facing termination, and Marsh is back in the ER like nothing happened. Not for long, Derek said quietly. They landed in Phoenix at 9:30, the desert heat hitting them like a physical wall when they stepped off the plane. A rental car was waiting. Hayes drove while Emma reviewed additional documentation Rivera had sent overnight, witness statements from other nurses who'd seen Marsh dismiss veteran patients, medical records showing a pattern of delayed or denied care for specific demographics, internal emails revealing the board's strategy to discredit Reeves. The evidence was damning. The question was whether Phoenix Memorial would acknowledge it or double down. They met Jessica Reeves at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital. She was slight, dark-haired, with exhaustion carved into every line of her face. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. "I didn't think anyone would come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I saw your story, I thought maybe someone would care. But I've been alone for 2 weeks. My union rep says I should apologize and take a demotion. My family thinks I should just quit and find another job." Emma reached across the table, covered Jessica's trembling hand with her own. "You're not alone anymore." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I was just trying to do my job. Torres could have died, should have died, with the delay Marsh caused. And now I'm the problem?" "Not anymore," Hayes said. "We're going to make sure the right people are held accountable." "How?" Jessica's voice cracked. "The board won't listen. The media won't care about one more nurse getting fired." Emma thought about the veterans standing in formation outside Riverside General, about Vincent Desmond's mugshot plastered across national news, about the Veterans Dignity Act working its way through Congress. "The media will care when we give them a story they can't ignore," she said. "Trust me." They spent the next 3 hours building a strategy. Hayes contacted his media connections, reporters who'd covered the Millbrook story and were hungry for a follow-up. Rivera coordinated with local veteran advocacy groups who immediately mobilized. Derek reached out to Adrian Torres, who was still in the hospital but conscious and eager to speak out. By 2 p.m., they had a plan. By 3 p.m., they were executing it. The press conference was held on the steps of Phoenix Memorial Hospital. 50 veterans formed up behind Emma and Jessica, their presence a silent declaration. Adrian Torres sat in a wheelchair at the center, his hospital gown visible under a navy jacket someone had draped over his shoulders. The media turnout was massive. Word had spread that the nurse from Millbrook was taking on another hospital, another corrupt system. Cameras lined the plaza. Reporters jockeyed for position. Emma stepped to the microphone forest, Jessica beside her, trembling but standing tall. 2 weeks ago, Navy veteran Adrian Torres nearly died because a doctor made assumptions based on prejudice instead of medical evidence. When nurse Jessica Reeves tried to advocate for her patient, she was silenced and suspended. Emma's voice carried across the crowd. This is the same pattern we saw in Millbrook, the same institutional failure, the same prioritization of reputation over responsibility. She gestured to Torres. "Adrian, tell them what happened." Torres gripped the wheelchair's arms, his voice rough but steady. "I served 8 years. Lost my eye in a training accident. Got honorably discharged. Thought I'd left the fighting behind." He paused, gathering strength. "But when I showed up at that ER in pain, the doctor looked at me like I was a drug addict, told me I was exaggerating, sent me away." His voice hardened. "I almost died in a parking lot because one man couldn't see past his assumptions. And the only person who fought for me is being punished." Jessica stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "I became a nurse to help people. All people. When I saw Adrian's symptoms, I knew something was seriously wrong. But Dr. Marsh dismissed both of us, Adrian for being a veteran seeking drugs, Me for being a young female nurse who didn't know her place. She looked directly at the cameras. I was told to apologize, to accept that I was wrong, to be grateful I wasn't being fired immediately. Her chin lifted. I'm done being grateful for scraps. Adrian deserves better. Veterans deserve better. And nurses who stand up for their patients deserve support, not punishment. Emma took the microphone back. Phoenix Memorial Hospital has a choice. They can acknowledge the problem, investigate Dr. Marsh's pattern of discriminatory care, and reinstate Nurse Reeves with a full apology. Or they can face the same scrutiny that brought down a corrupt board member in Colorado and sparked federal legislation. A reporter shouted, "What if they refuse?" Then we make sure every veteran in Arizona knows which hospital dismissed their service. We make sure every nurse knows which institution punishes advocacy. And we make sure every dollar of federal veteran care funding gets audited until this hospital proves it deserves it. Emma's smile was sharp. We don't give up. We don't back down. We just get louder. The press conference ended with the veterans saluting Torres and Reeves. The image, a wheelchair-bound veteran and a suspended nurse surrounded by people who'd served, was powerful enough that every network led with it on the evening news. By 6 p.m., Phoenix Memorial's board had requested an emergency meeting. By 7 p.m., Emma, Jessica, and Hayes were sitting across from hospital director Dr. Leonard Garrett and 3 board members in a conference room that reeked of expensive furniture and desperation. Garrett was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of practiced calm that came from years of managing crises. He folded his hands on the table. "Let's discuss how we can resolve this situation amicably," he began. "There's nothing to discuss," Emma said. "You reinstate Jessica Reeves immediately with back pay and a formal apology. You suspend Dr. Marsh pending a full investigation into his treatment patterns. And you establish a patient advocacy review board with veteran representation." One of the board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Miss Sharp, you're not in a position to make demands." "Yes, she is," Hayes interrupted. "She's got 50 veterans outside this building. She's got national media coverage, and she's got documentation of discriminatory practices that violate federal funding requirements." He slid a folder across the table. "That's a summary of complaints against Dr. Marsh over the past 5 years. Pattern discrimination, delayed care, dismissive treatment of specific patient populations. Any one of these would trigger an investigation. All of them together? You're looking at a civil rights lawsuit and federal funding suspension." Garrett opened the folder, his face going pale as he scanned the contents. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Internal sources. Whistleblowers. People who are tired of protecting a system that hurts patients." Hayes' voice was flat. "You can spend the next year fighting this in court and the media, or you can do the right thing right now." The board members exchanged glances. The thin man with glasses looked like he wanted to argue. The woman beside him put a hand on his arm, shook her head slightly. Garrett closed the folder. "We'll need to review this with legal counsel." "You've got 2 hours," Emma said. "After that, we hold another press conference and release everything we have, including the names of every board member who knew about Marsh's pattern and did nothing." Garrett's jaw tightened. "That's blackmail." "That's accountability." Emma stood. 2 hours, Dr. Garrett. Choose wisely." They walked out of the conference room into the late afternoon heat. Jessica looked shell-shocked. "That really just happened," she whispered. "That really just happened," Emma confirmed. "And it's going to work." "How can you be sure?" Emma thought about Wells' face when he'd realized the media storm wouldn't end quietly, about Vincent Desmond's arrest, about the way power crumbled when light hit it hard enough. "Because they're more scared of the truth than we are of their threats," she said. 97 minutes later, Dr. Garrett called Hayes' cell phone. The board had voted to accept the terms. Jessica Reeves was reinstated effective immediately with full back pay and a formal written apology. Dr. Kenneth Marsh was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The hospital committed to establishing a patient advocacy review board within 60 days, with mandatory veteran representation. Jessica collapsed against the rental car, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it. I can't." Emma pulled her into a fierce hug. "Believe it. You stood up. You didn't back down, and you won. We won, Jessica corrected, her voice muffled against Emma's shoulder. You did this. No. You did this when you filed that complaint knowing it could cost you everything. Emma pulled back, meeting Jessica's eyes. I just made sure you weren't alone when you did. Adrian Torres was discharged from the hospital the next day. The local veterans organization threw him a welcome home gathering, small, intimate, filled with people who understood what he'd survived both overseas and in that emergency room. Emma attended with Derek and Hayes. She watched Torres reunite with his wife and kids, saw the relief and gratitude in their faces, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since Millbrook. This was why it mattered. Not the press conferences or the medals or the national attention. This. One veteran going home to his family because someone had refused to look away. Derek found her standing alone near the edge of the gathering, watching the celebration with quiet satisfaction. You did good, he said. We did good, Emma corrected. I'm starting to see a pattern with you and Hayes, taking credit I don't deserve. You deserve more credit than you take. Derek shifted his weight, grimacing slightly. His burns were healing, but still tender. I talked to Hayes. He wants to formalize this, create an advocacy network, veterans and healthcare workers coordinating to fight these cases nationally. Emma turned to face him fully. An organization? More like a rapid response team. When situations like Millbrook or Phoenix happen, we mobilize. Media, legal support, veteran presence, the whole package. Derek's expression was serious. We could make this permanent, sustainable, turn 2 victories into a movement. That's a lot of work. Yeah, but you're already doing it. Might as well do it with resources and coordination. He paused. Hayes wants you to lead it. Says you've got the credibility and the instincts. Emma's breath caught. Lead it? You'd keep your nursing job. This would be part-time at first, then we see where it goes. Rivera's already drawing up nonprofit paperwork. We've got funding commitments from 3 veteran organizations. Derek's voice softened. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. Emma looked out at the gathering, veterans laughing, sharing stories, celebrating one small victory in a long war. She thought about her father, who'd never gotten this, who'd died alone because the system had failed him. I don't need to think about it, she said. I'm in. Derek's smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah. Emma felt something click into place, purpose crystallizing into commitment. Let's build something that matters. The next 2 weeks moved at breakneck speed. Hayes coordinated with his military contacts to establish the Veterans Dignity Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to combating discrimination against veterans and supporting healthcare workers who advocated for them. Rivera handled the legal framework. Margaret Chen, true to her word, came on as an advisory board member, bringing institutional healthcare knowledge. And Emma became the public face of it all. She gave interviews explaining the mission. She testified before a congressional subcommittee alongside Representative Matthews, her words helping push the Veterans Dignity Act toward passage. She traveled to 3 more cities where similar situations were unfolding, her presence galvanizing local advocacy and forcing institutional accountability. Everywhere she went, Derek went with her. His tactical mind complemented her healthcare expertise. His military credibility opened doors her nursing background couldn't. They became a team in a way that felt inevitable, natural, right. 6 weeks after Phoenix, Emma returned to Millbrook for Vincent Desmond's trial. The courthouse was packed. Media lined the steps. Veterans filled the gallery. Vincent sat at the defendant's table in a suit that looked too expensive for the circumstances, his lawyers flanking him like shields. Ralph Desmond took the stand on day 2. He looked older, thinner, haunted by the fire that had destroyed his business and nearly his life. But his voice was steady as he testified about Vincent's pressure, the false complaint, the scheme to protect the family's reputation at Emma's expense. He told me she was dangerous, Ralph said quietly, that she was trying to destroy our family, that if I didn't file the complaint, he'd withdraw his financial support and let the diner fail. He paused, his throat working. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was scared, because it was easier than admitting I'd been wrong about that veteran. Vincent's lawyers tried to discredit him, suggesting Ralph was lying to avoid his own prosecution. But the emails were there. The paper trail was there. The pattern was undeniable. Emma testified on day 3. She walked the jury through everything: the diner, the suspension, the threats, the systematic abuse of power. She kept her voice level, her facts precise, her emotion controlled. When Vincent's lead attorney tried to paint her as an opportunist seeking publicity, she met his eyes without flinching. "I bought breakfast for a man who'd served his country because it was the right thing to do. Everything that happened after that was a direct result of Vincent Desmond trying to punish basic human decency. If that makes me an opportunist, then I'm guilty as charged." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, Vincent Desmond was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and permanent disqualification from holding any position involving oversight of public funds. His reputation was destroyed. His career was over. His legacy was corruption and cowardice. Emma watched the sentencing from the gallery, Derek beside her, Hayes behind them. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emma gave a brief statement. "This verdict isn't about revenge. It's about accountability." Vincent Desmond abused his power to silence someone who stood up for a veteran. He paid the price, and hopefully, others who might consider doing the same will think twice. "What's next for you?" a reporter called out. Emma smiled. "We keep fighting. There are Jessica Reeves and Adrian Torres situations happening every day across this country. We're going to find them, we're going to support them, and we're going to make sure the system changes." 3 months later, the Veterans Dignity Act passed Congress with bipartisan support. President signed it into law at a ceremony attended by veterans groups, healthcare advocates, and the people who'd made it possible. Emma stood in the front row, medal from the Navy still pinned to her jacket. Derek stood beside her in full dress uniform. Jessica Reeves had flown in from Phoenix. Adrian Torres was there with his family. When the president finished signing, he looked up at the assembled crowd. "This legislation exists because ordinary people did extraordinary things. They stood up when standing up had consequences. They refused to be silenced when silence was easier. They proved that one person's courage can change a nation." His eyes found Emma. "Thank you for reminding us what service really means." The ceremony ended with a reception. Emma found herself surrounded by veterans thanking her, healthcare workers sharing their own stories, lawmakers promising to keep pushing for reform. She slipped away after an hour, needing air and quiet. She found both on a balcony overlooking the National Mall, the monuments lit against the night sky. Derek found her there 20 minutes later. "Hiding?" he asked. "Breathing," Emma corrected. "It's a lot." "Yeah." Derek leaned against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "For what it's worth, you handled it perfectly." I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's not true. You'd have found a way." Derek's voice was soft. "But I'm glad I got to be part of it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching tourists move between monuments, the city alive with purpose and history. "I've been thinking," Derek said eventually, "about what comes next. The Alliance is just getting started. We've got cases in 7 states, funding for 3 full-time staff positions, a database of volunteer advocates." "I meant for us," Derek interrupted gently. Emma's breath caught. She turned to face him, found him already looking at her with an expression that made her heart stutter. "Us?" she managed. "I'm in Virginia. You're in Colorado. We've been doing this long-distance dance for 3 months, and it's working, but—" Derek reached out, his hand finding hers. "I don't want distance anymore. I want to wake up and have coffee with you before you go to work. I want to plan strategy sessions over dinner. I want to build this thing we started together, actually together." Emma's throat tightened. "Derek, you don't have to answer now, but I'm transferring to the Navy's Regional Command in Colorado. Hayes approved it. I'll be based out of Denver, which is close enough to Millbrook that we can figure out the logistics." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "If you want to." Emma thought about the past 3 months. The late-night phone calls when cases got hard. The way Derek understood the work without her having to explain. The quiet moments between chaos when they just existed together, easy and right. She thought about her father, who'd taught her that standing up mattered even when it was hard. She thought about Derek, who'd stood up beside her and never wavered. "I want to," she said quietly. "Very much." Derek's smile was sunrise bright. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, the noise of the reception fading into background static. "Good," he whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." They kissed on that balcony overlooking monuments to service and sacrifice, two people who'd found each other in crisis and built something that mattered from the wreckage. 6 months later, Emma stood in Riverside General's newest wing, the Veterans Care Center, fully funded and operational. The Ombudsman office was staffed by a former Army medic who understood both healthcare and military culture. The protocols were clear, the oversight transparent, the commitment genuine. Margaret Chen had been promoted to Chief Nursing Officer, her first major initiative ensuring that advocacy was valued, not punished. Dr. Waverly had quietly retired, replaced by an attending who actually listened to his nurses. The hospital that had tried to silence Emma had become a model for veteran care. She walked through the wing with Derek, who'd just returned from a deployment supporting training operations. His transfer had gone through. They'd found an apartment halfway between Denver and Millbrook that felt like home in a way neither of them had expected. "Your dad would be proud," Derek said quietly, watching Emma review a patient chart with one of the new nurses. Emma looked up, surprised. "What made you think of him?" "Because this is his legacy as much as yours. He served, he sacrificed, he deserved better." Derek's voice was gentle. "You made sure other veterans get what he should have had. That matters." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "Yeah," she said, "it does." That evening, she returned to her apartment and pulled out a box from the back of her closet. Inside were her father's medals, his dress uniform, photographs from his service. She'd avoided looking at them for years, the grief too raw, the loss too sharp. But now she could see them differently. Not as reminders of failure, but as evidence of sacrifice that had finally been honored. She set the box on her dresser, her father's purple heart beside the medal the Navy had given her. 2 generations. 2 different kinds of service, connected by the belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when the cost was high. The Veterans Dignity Alliance continued to grow. By the end of the year, they'd handled 47 cases across 16 states. 39 resulted in policy changes or personnel accountability. 8 were still in progress. 0 had been abandoned. Emma balanced her nursing work with Alliance leadership, finding that the two complemented each other in unexpected ways. Her clinical skills informed her advocacy. Her advocacy made her a better nurse. Derek became the Alliance's operations director, bringing military precision to their rapid response protocols. Hayes remained an advisory board member, his network of contacts invaluable for cutting through bureaucratic resistance. Jessica Reeves joined as their Southwest Regional Coordinator, her experience in Phoenix making her perfect for supporting other healthcare workers facing retaliation. And 1 year to the day after Emma had shared her table with Derek at the Anchor Diner, they returned to that spot. The building was gone, demolished after the fire. But the lot had been purchased by a veterans organization and transformed into a memorial park. Benches, a flagpole, plaques honoring local veterans. At the center stood a simple stone marker, in memory of all veterans who served with honor and deserved to be seen. Emma and Derek stood before it, hands linked, surrounded by the people who'd made this possible. Hayes and his team, Margaret Chen, Rachel Kim, Thomas Rivera, the 73 veterans who'd stood in formation outside the hospital. A small ceremony marked the anniversary. The mayor spoke about change. Veterans shared stories. Emma was asked to say a few words. She stepped forward, Derek beside her, and looked at the assembled crowd. "A year ago, I bought breakfast for a stranger. That small act became something bigger than I ever imagined, not because I'm special, but because it mattered." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Every day people make choices about whether to look away or lean in, whether to stay silent or speak up, whether to accept injustice or fight back. She gestured to the memorial park. This exists because enough people chose to lean in, to speak up, to fight back, and it will keep existing as long as we remember that one person's courage can change everything. Emma's eyes found the faces in the crowd, veterans who'd found dignity, healthcare workers who'd found support, allies who'd found purpose. So to everyone who's ever been told to be quiet, to back down, to accept that this is just how things are, don't. Stand up, speak out, make space at your table. She smiled. You never know what might happen when you do. The ceremony ended with a flag raising, veterans saluting, civilians placing hands over hearts, the fabric catching wind and snapping against blue Colorado sky. Derek pulled Emma aside as the crowd began to disperse. You know what I realized? He asked. What? That diner owner told you not to encourage that kind of scene. Derek's smile was soft. And you responded by creating the biggest, most important scene of your life. Emma laughed, the sound bright and free. I guess I did. Good. Derek kissed her forehead. Don't stop. Don't plan to. They walked back to Derek's truck, past the memorial that marked an ending and a beginning, past the space where a small act of kindness had sparked a movement. Emma Sharp had been a nurse trying to do her job. Then she became a woman who wouldn't be silenced. Then she became a symbol of what courage looked like when it stood its ground. And finally, she became exactly who she was always meant to be. Someone who made sure that veterans were seen, healthcare workers were protected, and basic human dignity was non-negotiable. The Navy SEAL who'd asked to share her table had changed her life. But she'd changed his too. And together they'd changed a system that desperately needed changing. The work would continue. More cases would come. More fights would need fighting. But Emma was ready. She'd learned that standing up was hard. She'd learned that justice was worth the cost. And she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was make space for someone else's humanity. One table at a time. One veteran at a time, one act of courage at a time, until the whole world finally understood that service deserved more than empty gratitude. It deserved recognition. It deserved respect. It deserved a seat at the table. And Emma Sharp would spend the rest of her life making sure every veteran got exactly that.